just like all truly excellent French pastries, French macarons are a labor of love. Now, these macarons should have a crispy shell, which when you bite into it, it yields to a perfectly moist, chewy almond cookie inside. And the fillings need to be of the utmost quality to reflect the incredible amount of labor that goes into making these perfectly. There was definitely a time in America where unless you were planning a trip to Paris, you just were not going to get the real thing. Nowadays, you can find specialty bakeries that do specialize in macarons. If you do not have one of those bakeries in your area and you'd like to learn how to make these, stay tuned, and we're going to be doing two separate videos here. This one is going to focus strictly on chocolate macarons. These have a pure chocolate ganache inside. And then after that, the next video, I'm going to concentrate on the buttercreams, the buttercream French macarons, which will be handled differently because they're slightly different applications. So if you'd like to learn how to make these, and admittedly these can be a little tricky, a little bit tricky, but if you just learn the rules of exactly what to do here, I think anyone can pull these off. So let's get started. Alright, so let's get started on these chocolate French macarons, and I just wanted to go over these ingredients here first and get you set up for success. And as always, I'm going to have the full recipe and all the method all down in the description box beneath the video. But for now, I'm going to just talk about a couple of things here. Now, this is what you need for the chocolate macarons. We'll work on the other flavors a little bit later. But what I have here is fine almond flour, and I just sifted that a couple of days ago with the 10x sugar, the confectioner sugar. And what I did was just put this on a sheet tray and I let this out to dry. You can dry this out for a couple of days and you'll have a lot more success with your macarons if you dry out these dry ingredients. If you're in a hurry, you can just put these in a 200-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 10 or 15 minutes. But I'd recommend just putting this out a couple of days before you're ready to work with your macarons. Also, it's important that you dry out or age your egg whites. So what I did here was yesterday, I knew I was going to be making meringues, so I put these egg whites out at room temperature and just put some plastic wrap over top with some holes in it. That's just to let the moisture evaporate out. And then obviously the other ingredients, you're going to need some good chocolate here for the ganache that goes in the center, and some good cocoa of your choice for the shells, the macaron shells. And in the French ganache that I'm going to be making for the filling, I'm going to be using some 82% butter and also some heavy cream. You're going to need the organic sugar. I have vanilla paste that's going to go in the ganache. Lastly, we have here some non-GMO corn syrup and a little bit of pure filtered water. So with all that said, let's get started mixing this up. So the first thing that we're going to do here is put the dried out almond flour and confectioner's sugar blend, you should have already sifted that together and made sure that it's dried out nicely. And then we're going to put some of this cocoa in here in the bowl of a food processor. It makes your life a little easier. If you don't have a food processor, it's not really a big deal. Just make sure that you're using the finest almond flour that you can find. Fine meaning the texture should be very, very fine, and it also should make sure that it's skinless. I used Bob's Red Mill, I believe it's called, organic almond flour in here. So we're just going to blend this up here for a second. You probably only need to do this about 10 or 15 seconds, or you can pulse it. Just till it all goes chocolatey looking and it's well blended. So also then, after you're done processing the almond flour, confectioner's sugar, and the cocoa together, make sure that you also pass this mixture through a screen just to make sure that you're getting all of the lumps out and it's as fine and combined as possible. As you can see, this mixture right out of the food processor is kind of lumpy and it's created some lumps, so it's necessary to get this nice fine texture on it, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is to pass it through a fine mesh screen. So as soon as you have your almond flour mixture and the half of the egg whites to the side, and don't worry, I'm going to give all of the weights and measures as I said. This is just pretty much the method. So this is how your setup should look basically. You should have a stand mixer there, and next to that have a burner. What we're going to do here is make something called an Italian meringue, which is basically just a stabilized meringue. I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. So in the bowl of your stand mixer, put the other half of the egg whites into your bowl. And this is just going to be a fairly small amount here. So since this is a relatively small amount of meringue, I'm going to start it by hand with a whip. And this is just so I can whip it up and get it ready to go here with the whip, because it's hard with my mixer for some reason, the one that I use for the whip attachment to the whisk attachment, to pick up this little bit of egg white. So it's just a tip for you. If you're just making a small amount of meringue in a large stand mixer, you can start it off with a whip, and then that way the mixer can pick it up. So once you get it nice and frothy like that, then you can put it on your stand mixer with the whisk attachment. So then the next step here is to create your syrup. This hot syrup gets streamed into the meringue. So I just put a little water there in the bottom of a sauce pot and pour your sugar in there right in the center. Try not to get any up on the sides, as always. Just stir this gently until all of the sugar gets absorbed into that water. And then what we're going to do here is cook this to 240 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's roughly the softball stage. And then we're going to stream that into the mixing meringue. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a few minutes. Also, as always, have a little bit of water here and a pastry brush on the side so that you can go in there and wipe down any sugar crystals. Because, of course, if you get sugar crystals up on the side of your sauce pot, that can then fall back down into the solution, and your sugar solution will get gritty and you won't be able to use it. You'll have to start all over. So always keep that to the side when you're making a syrup like this. So then as soon as your syrup gets to around 230 degrees, you can add in the corn syrup, and then we're going to stream this into the meringue that I've got working here. Okay, so your syrup should be right at 240 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and now your meringue, you should already have fluffy at this point. And turn your stand mixer on full blast, and we're going to stream this syrup very carefully down the side here, trying not to hit this super molten hot syrup on your whisk. So let's see what we could come up with here. So once you get all of that syrup incorporated into your meringue, then you want to let the mixer run for about 3 or 4 minutes till it starts to cool down. So while your meringue is whipping for a few minutes and cooling down, get your almond flour and cocoa mixture here and pour in the other half of that egg white that you had and mix that together till it's smooth. Now this mixture is going to be very stiff here, so just mix that all together while your meringue is beating and cooling. So this should be the final result of the Italian meringue. It should be very shiny, a lot like marshmallow basically. And now we're just going to add that to our almond flour and egg white mixture. Just add it all of the Italian meringue at once. So as soon as you've added all of your finished Italian meringue to the almond flour and cocoa mixture, then take a large rubber spatula and mix this real well. And it's important not to rush this. You're going to want to mix this very thoroughly. So I'll show you what that looks like here. It's almost a folding situation here. It just takes some patience to work all of this together. Okay, so I mixed this macaron batter at least 10 minutes by hand. And it should, to do this properly, you really should test it here and just kind of drip some off the spatula on the surface. And you should notice that the drips kind of sink down into the batter within about 15 or 20 seconds. That's what you want. If it's still holding the shape after about 15 or 20 seconds, then you should continue to mix. So as I said, this has been hand mixed for about 10 minutes now, and I think we're pretty good. It's sinking down into itself. So what I'm going to do next here is I am going to load a large bag like that. You can also use if you have the large disposable, it'll work. The tip that I'm using here is an Atico 806, just a large open tip. So I'm going to go ahead and load this pastry bag here. And it's going to make your life so much easier if you have a large water pitcher or a larger mixing pitcher like this. And what I'll do here is just kind of twist this off and drape the bag over the sides like that. Just a tip that you could use, to make loading your bags a lot easier. So just go ahead and load your pastry bag. So then another tip that I could recommend for you is these Silpat sheets for piping macarons. Kind of takes the guesswork out of it. If you're not making 1,000 of these a day, it does kind of help a little bit with your piping. And it's just a lot easier than having to draw little circles on a parchment sheet. Although I've done plenty of that, I think this is way more convenient. So now when you get these piped, it's real important. You can't just put these right into the oven. Give them a little tap. If you do have any air bubbles, which you shouldn't really have air bubbles if you mixed your batter properly, I find that air bubbles usually result from just not mixing long enough, the batter long enough. But if you do, you can always use a little toothpick or a paring knife or something and just pop those. But you have to let these set for at least 45 minutes before you bake them off. And the reason why you're doing that is because you're trying to form a skin on top. And you should be able to touch these after a half an hour, 45 minutes, and not have batter come away on your finger. But let these form a skin. That way they're not, if you put these in the oven right now, they could really balloon up and make you look like a fool. So unless you don't mind feeling like a fool, then just let these set before you bake them off. Okay, so I've given our macaron shells here about 45 minutes to dry out. And hopefully you can see that how they've kind of turned to a matte color and there's nothing sticking on my skin. So now we're going to bake these off one tray at a time though, in the middle of your oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to get started here while these are baking on the chocolate ganache that goes inside these. Okay, so while you are baking your shells, you have plenty of time to put together a nice cream ganache here for these macarons. And this is really delicious if you do it this way. What I like to do, I'm using a 64% Belgian dark chocolate. I could recommend anywhere between 60 to 70%. I wouldn't go too dark on that unless you really like it, but then you'll have to increase the heavy cream with this, of course. But what I like to do is just shred these little calais up into a fine crumb. So you could just pulse this in a food processor. So you should have something there maybe a little bit thicker than breadcrumbs. And now what I have here on the heat is some heavy cream, and I've got some honey in this. And this type of ganache comes together really fast if you do it this way in the food processor. I really think that this is the best way I've ever found to do a small quantity of chocolate ganache. I think it works really well. It's pretty much idiot proof. So as soon as you're starting to break bubbles on the surface like that, then just pour this heavy cream and honey down your feed tube in your food processor. So then as soon as you have a nice shiny ganache like that, just let this cool down for a little while. And we're going to put some soft but not melted butter in this after this cools down a little while. Maybe, I don't know exactly the temperature you're looking for, but you want this to cool down before you beat in this butter. So we'll come back to this in a couple of minutes here. Okay, so I've given our chocolate ganache here probably about 15 minutes to cool down. You want to make sure that it's cool to the touch but not completely set up. And what I have here is some 82% European butter, and I also added some vanilla bean paste. So just put that in there. And this butter needs to be soft but definitely not melted. It should be basically room temperature, but a little softer than room temperature maybe, but make sure it's not melted or it can definitely screw up your ganache and make it kind of greasy. So that's really all there is to it. Just make sure that you're not seeing any chunks of butter or anything, or even if you do see a little bit of butter in there, that's fine. But don't overmix it at this point. Just pour it into a bowl and let this cool down. And you want this to a consistency. You want this to a consistency where it's pipeable but not completely set. Okay, so once you get your chocolate macaron shells cooled down and you get them off the mats, then just put them all in a pan And what I'm using here for the chocolate ganache is just a disposable bag with a small open tip. And just pipe in whatever you feel is good, and try to match it up with, because invariably you're going to end up, some of your shells, unless you're an expert piper, it's kind of hard to get them exact no matter how hard you try until you've done about 10,000 of these. So, match them up and just pipe you just pipe like this in a spiral. I'd say maybe 5 to 7 grams or so, 8 grams of filling, or you could call it maybe around a tablespoon or so, I want to say. And yeah, that's about it. It's pretty self-explanatory from there. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind with macarons is these shells, when they're done baking, they're quite crisp and they should sound kind of hollow inside, and they're hard. So these have to set up in your refrigerator for preferably 2 days before you can eat these. If you try to eat these right now, they would not be very pleasant to eat. What happens over the course of a couple of days is they get very moist and get that chewy, delicious, incredible flavor on them. So definitely let these set up in your refrigerator at least for a day, preferably 2 days before if you're going to sell these or give them away as gifts, definitely give them time in the refrigerator to set up nicely for you, and you'll definitely be rewarded. Don't try and eat these right now. Okay, so let's just cut into one of these French chocolate macarons and see how the texture is. It should have a nice crispy shell, which should yield to an extremely chewy, delightful almond cookie and an intense chocolate ganache in the center. So that's what that texture looks like there. These appear to be correct. They look really nice. So let's give one of these little beauties a try. Okay, so now is the moment of truth. I'm going to try one of these delightful little cookies, and I'll let you know what I think. Very intense, beautiful chocolate aroma. Yeah, that's exactly what you want right there. What more could you ask for? Chewy, intense chocolate flavor. You can really taste that chocolate ganache, and the shell has that separate nutty aroma and flavor to it because of the almond. Yeah, these are ridiculous. Really nice, chewy texture, very moist inside, deep chocolate flavor. I used a 64% ganache, so it's got some really good deep chocolate flavors to it, and the crispy but moist and tender inside of the shell. Has a very distinct nutty flavor to it because of the almond. So I hope that you'll give these a try, and in our next video we're going to be doing these exact same cookies except with different flavors of buttercreams inside. So stay tuned for that, and I'll catch you in that one. Thanks for joining me.